This story is titled, "Friend Had an Affair with My Wife After I Inherited a Fortune. Now They Want to Reconcile." Hey everyone, exciting news. I just launched a new channel with even more Reddit stories. This time we've got a fresh voice, shorter videos, and some great stories lined up. Take a listen in this video, and if you're into it, check out the link in the description to head over to the new channel. Let me know what you think. So now to the story. OP starts by saying, "So here's the deal. My wife, 30F, and I, 32M, had this camping trip planned with a couple of our friends. Nothing fancy. Just a few days out in the woods to unplug, roast marshmallows, tell dumb stories around the fire, that sort of thing. We've been doing these trips with these friends for years, so it's always pretty laid back. She and I have been together since freshman year of college, so they're practically like family to us. Anyway, the trip itself was solid, no drama, nothing out of the ordinary. We grilled, we drank, we laughed. Honestly, one of the best weekends we'd had in a while. But then, on the last morning, something happened that completely threw me. It was just this split-second thing, but it's been playing over in my head on repeat ever since. Like some messed up scene you can't get out of your brain. We were all packing up, right? Everyone's kind of dragging their stuff back to the cars, half awake, and just trying to get out of there without leaving anything behind. I was loading up our car when I happened to glance over at my wife and one of our friends. They were maybe 10 or 15 feet away, so not right up close, but close enough that I could see what was going on. She bent down to pick something up, and in that second, he reached out and squeezed her hip, then let his hand slide down to her butt. And she didn't get mad or push him away or anything. She just smiled at him like it was some inside joke or something. It was quick, maybe a second or two, but it was long enough to make my stomach drop. I didn't even realize I was just standing there staring. My brain was trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, but nothing was clicking. I did this quick look around to see if anyone else had seen it, but nope. Everyone was in their own world. His wife was busy packing up their car, and the other couple was already walking back toward the parking lot, chatting about the drive home. So there I was, just frozen, replaying the scene over and over in my head, trying to figure out if maybe I'd imagined it. But it was real. I saw it, and I can't unsee it. The drive back home was weird, to say the least. My wife tried to make small talk, chatting about random stuff, like how great the trip was, what a good time we all had. But I couldn't focus. I was trying to keep it together, but my mind kept going back to what I saw. At one point, she even asked why I was so quiet. I mumbled something about work, which seemed to satisfy her, but I could tell she was eyeing me like she knew something was off. I just didn't want to bring it up in the car. What would I even say? Hey, why did our friend have his hand all over you? And she'd just brush it off, say I was seeing things, tell me I'm paranoid. When we got home, I just felt completely off. There's no other way to put it. It was like I was on autopilot, going through the motions without actually being there. The whole day went by like a blur. I kept catching myself zoning out, just staring into space, replaying that scene at the campsite, trying to make sense of it. And every time, I ended up with the same gut feeling. Something wasn't right. That night, I barely slept. I was lying there in bed next to her, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that image of him touching her and her smiling at him. It was like this nasty knot in my stomach that just wouldn't go away. I kept telling myself maybe I'd read too much into it, maybe it was just a friendly thing, but my gut was screaming that there was more to it. I've always trusted her, We've been together for over a decade, and not once did I ever think she'd give me a reason to doubt her. She's always been my best friend, my partner in everything, but for the first time, there was this tiny crack in that trust, and I didn't know what to do about it. It was like this whole new side of her was staring me right in the face, and I couldn't ignore it, no matter how much I wanted to. The next morning, I got up, went through my usual routine, and headed to work, but I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body. Everything felt wrong. I couldn't shake that gut feeling, and every time I tried to push it down, it came back even stronger. The worst part was that I had no idea what to do. Do I confront her? Do I just ignore it and hope it goes away? I didn't want to seem like some paranoid guy jumping to conclusions, but I also didn't want to be the fool who just turned a blind eye to something so obvious. By lunch, I was so distracted I couldn't even focus on my work. I kept replaying that damn moment, analyzing every little detail, looking for something, anything that would make it make sense. Maybe it was just a one-off thing, a moment of poor judgment or something, but the more I thought about it, the more that explanation didn't add up. Why was she so comfortable with him touching her like that? And why didn't she look guilty or embarrassed when she saw me looking? She didn't even glance my way. She just smiled at him like it was nothing. I kept going back and forth, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but that knot in my stomach just wouldn't go away. I knew I couldn't keep this up. It was eating me alive, slowly but surely. I had to do something, anything, to put my mind at ease, but I didn't know what that was yet. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, mentally and physically. My wife acted like everything was fine, totally normal, and I did my best to act the same way. I felt like I was wearing a mask, pretending like nothing was wrong when, deep down, everything felt wrong. And the worst part was that she didn't notice a thing. She just went about her evening like usual, chatting about her day, asking me about mine, and I just nodded along, giving one-word answers. That night, lying in bed again, the knot in my stomach was worse than ever. I kept turning over, trying to get comfortable, but nothing worked. The house was quiet, and in that silence, all I could hear was my own thoughts, getting louder and louder, refusing to let me ignore them. That image of her and him at the campsite wouldn't go away, no matter how much I wanted to shake it off. In that moment, I knew I had to figure out what was really going on, no matter where it led. Alright, so after that trip, things were pretty tense for me. I kept that whole moment between my wife and our friend in the back of my head, replaying it over and over, but I still couldn't bring myself to bring it up with her. I knew I needed some kind of answer to calm my mind, but I wasn't sure how to get it without making things weird. That's when the opportunity literally dropped into my lap. One morning, I was working from home, trying to get back into my usual routine. I was at the kitchen counter, grabbing a quick coffee before jumping into some emails, when I noticed her iPad just sitting there. Normally, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. It's been around forever, and she barely even uses the thing. But this time, I don't know, something just clicked. That gut feeling from the campsite started gnawing at me again, and before I could talk myself out of it, I picked it up. Now, here's the crazy part. She hadn't even put a password on it. She's usually pretty careful with her tech, like she's got her phone locked down with some long code that I don't even know. But the iPad? Open season. Part of me felt guilty just holding it, but at the same time, I thought, look, if there's nothing to hide, then I'll be reassured, and if there's something, well, then I'll know. So I took a deep breath and opened it. First thing I noticed was that her Telegram app was open, synced right to her phone. I wasn't even planning to dig into anything specific, but there it was, staring at me, like the universe was telling me to look. I was shaking, hands all sweaty, but I went ahead and opened the app. It's weird, but I felt like if I didn't look right then, I'd regret it forever. And that's when it hit me like a freight train. There it all was, right there in black and white. Messages from our friend dating back months. At first it was pretty tame, just chatting about random stuff, like making plans to meet up and the usual inside jokes. But as I kept scrolling, it got worse, way worse. They were talking about meeting up alone. Things like, I can't wait to see you, and missed you so much. I felt this weird chill run down my spine, and I had to stop and take a breath because it was all too much. I kept scrolling, half of me hoping I'd find some kind of explanation, like maybe I was misunderstanding it all, but it was right there, spelled out for me in plain, painful words. Flirty texts, a couple of suggestive photos. They even had plans to officially be together at some point in the future. That part hit me the hardest. It wasn't just some passing fling. They were talking about making it something real. And the worst part, all this had been happening right under my nose. It was like this mix of anger, sadness, and shock all hit me at once. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and just plain furious, but I forced myself to keep scrolling, telling myself I needed to know everything. I needed the full picture so I wouldn't be blindsided later. So I kept going, taking screenshots with my phone just in case. I didn't want to lose any of this, and I wasn't sure how to get the messages off the iPad without her noticing. I can't explain it, but in that moment, I felt like I was outside myself, like I was watching this whole thing happen to someone else. I read messages about her day-to-day, our life together, mixed in with these flirty, intimate exchanges with him. They'd talk about meeting up while I was busy, sharing these little jokes about things I'd never heard of. Stuff like, remember the lake? And can't wait for the next time. It's like I was seeing a side of her I didn't know existed, a whole other life she was hiding from me. Then I came across a message from her that just pushed me over the edge. It was something like, I'll make it work, I just need a little more time. She was talking about me, about how she had to manage me to keep her secrets safe until they were ready. My own wife managing me, lying to my face every single day, acting like we were fine while planning her future with him. I was just a placeholder until she figured things out with him. I took as many screenshots as I could, grabbing grabbing every piece of evidence I'd need. I kept reminding myself that if I was going to confront her, I needed to do it right. No guessing, no half-truths, just the full story out in the open. The one thing I knew was that I had to be smart about this. I wasn't about to let her gaslight me or turn this around like I was being paranoid or controlling. The proof was right here, in her words, and I was going to make sure she couldn't worm her way out of it. When I finally put the iPad down, I felt numb, completely drained. I'd always thought if something like this ever happened, I'd feel nothing but anger, but it wasn't like that. I felt like my whole world had been flipped upside down. Here was this person I'd shared my life with for so many years, and in a few minutes, I found out she was practically a stranger to me. Every memory, every moment we'd shared now felt tainted, like it was all part of some big lie. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the wall, not knowing what to do next. I wanted to march into the next room and confront her, let her know I knew everything, but another part of me knew I couldn't just fly off the handle. I needed to be careful, to protect myself, especially with everything we shared, our apartment, our finances, and most importantly, my parents' inheritance. That was a gift they left me, and there was no way I was letting her get her hands on it after this, so I put the iPad back exactly where I found it, like nothing had happened. I knew I'd need time to figure out my next steps, to get everything in order before dropping the hammer. But man, it was hard. Every second that passed, every time she talked to me like nothing was wrong, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I was barely holding it together, but I knew I had to keep playing along, at least until I figured out how to confront her the right way. So that's where I am now, sitting on this pile of evidence, my entire life flipped on its head, trying to figure out what comes next. I never thought I'd be in this position, trying to dig up every last piece of proof on the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. But now, I don't even know what to believe. All I know is, things will never be the same from here on out. After digging through her iPad and seeing all those messages, I felt like I was living in some alternate reality. I mean, I'd always thought I'd know if something like this was going on. We've been together for so long that I figured I'd catch on if things started slipping. But here I was, sitting on proof that my wife and my supposed friend had been running around behind my back for who knows how long. And now I had no idea what to do next. I knew one thing though, I wasn't about to blow it all up without a plan. I couldn't just barge into the living room and start shouting. No way. She'd just turn it on me, say I was making things up, say it was just friendly talk or some excuse. I needed everything in place first, especially considering we shared finances, an apartment, and all the rest. I didn't want to end up with my life torn apart and then get burned on the legal side too. So I sat down, took a deep breath, and started thinking through every angle. First thing, I had to figure out what I wanted. Confront her? Sure. But then what? I didn't want to stay in a marriage with a cheater, and divorce wasn't some simple decision either. We have a lot tied up together, and honestly, I wasn't about to let her get away with messing with my life like this. I mean, she knew about the inheritance my parents left me, and had always been aware of how much it meant to me. I couldn't let her get her hands on that after everything she'd done. So I took the rest of that day just getting my head together, trying to keep things calm on the surface. She acted like everything was normal, asking about my day, joking around like there was nothing at all going on. Meanwhile, I was thinking of every way to keep her completely in the dark until I was ready to hit her with everything. I knew that if she even suspected I knew, she'd start covering her tracks, deleting messages, lying her way out of it, or even trying to paint me as paranoid. She was that good at pretending. That night, I barely slept again. I was lying there, feeling the weight of everything, and trying to figure out where to even start. The next morning, I called in sick to work, telling my boss I had a personal emergency. I didn't know how long this was going to take, but I needed a day to get my facts straight and line things up. First step, find a lawyer. I didn't know much about the divorce process, but I figured I'd better get some legal advice from a pro. I started with some Google searches, looking up local attorneys with good reviews, and wrote down a list of contacts. Then I made a few calls. I tried to be as calm as possible, but I felt my heart pounding with each call. Most places had wait times of a week or more for a consultation, but I got lucky with one who had a cancellation and could see me that afternoon. I took it without hesitation. The wait until the appointment was brutal. I paced around the house, nervous she'd catch on somehow. I took screenshots of everything on the iPad, carefully saving each one to a backup I'd stashed in my work email. The messages, the pictures, every little piece of evidence I'd found. I wanted to make sure I had all the proof I needed just in case things got messy. At the lawyer's office, I was trying to keep my cool, but it was clear the guy had dealt with this kind of thing before. He just nodded and let me vent, then asked all the right questions, breaking down the process step by step. It was almost like he'd done this a million times, which, let's be real, he probably had. He walked me through everything, how to protect my assets, how to gather evidence, and how to keep my inheritance safe from her reach. He even gave me a heads up about potential tricks she might try to pull once she caught on. He said something that stuck with me. If she's been hiding things from you this well, don't expect her to suddenly play fair. That hit hard because I realized he was right. My wife had already proven she could lie straight to my face without batting an eye. And if she was willing to cheat on me and keep it going for months, then she'd probably do anything to come out ahead once things got real. After the meeting, I felt like I had a better grip on what I needed to do. First, I had to keep everything looking normal until I was totally ready. No hint that I was onto her, no sudden changes in my routine. Just play along. Act like nothing was wrong. It felt like the fakest thing I'd ever done. But I knew it was the only way to get through this without her catching on. Over the next few days, I kept my cool, mostly hiding out in my home office and pretending to be busy with work. Every time I saw her, though, it got harder to act normal. I mean, here's this person I've shared my life with for over a decade, and now I'm watching her every move like she's a stranger I don't trust. She talked to me about her day, make jokes, try to pull me in for a hug, and every time it just felt like another stab in the back. I had to remind myself to keep it cool, to think about the end game. It was all about getting to that moment when I could confront her and know I was covered on all sides. I spent the rest of that week quietly moving some of my finances around, just to make sure things were secure. I didn't know how she'd react once I laid it all out, and I wasn't taking any chances. It felt weird, like I was doing something wrong, but I kept reminding myself that I was just protecting what was rightfully mine. It's not like I'd ever expect her to stoop low enough to try and mess with my finances, but at this point, I couldn't put anything past her. By the end of the week, I'd lined up everything I could think of. The lawyer was ready to go, my proof was safe, and my finances were protected. I still didn't know exactly how I'd confront her, but at least I felt like I had a safety net. I was in control of the situation, or as much as I could be, but still, every night when I went to bed next to her, pretending everything was fine, it felt like I was losing a little piece of myself. There was this constant tension, this knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I wanted so badly to just get it over with, to put everything out in the open, but I knew patience was key and I'd have to wait until everything was lined up perfectly. That was the hardest part, just waiting, holding back when every instinct I had was telling me to confront her right then and there. It felt like torture, but I kept reminding myself that soon enough, she'd know everything and she wouldn't have a single way out. So after a week of walking on eggshells, I finally felt ready to confront her. I'd gone through every message, every bit of proof I'd saved, and had all my legal ducks in a row. My lawyer had advised me to be careful with what I said when I finally brought this up. Just get her to admit it and keep things simple. So, with that in mind, I set things up for the talk. She'd gone to her sister's house to help with the kids, which, based on everything I'd read, meant she was probably with him. She came back on a Sunday evening, all smiles, talking about how her sister's kids were so cute and how it was nice to spend time with family. I just nodded along, keeping a straight face while she went on. I think I even managed to smile a bit, though it felt fake as hell. Then I told her we needed to talk, real serious, which she probably noticed was unusual for me. She looked a little concerned, but agreed, so we sat down in the living room. I'd been practicing what I was going to say, keeping it cool and calm, but now that I was looking her in the eye, it was way harder than I'd imagined. All I wanted to do was yell, scream, let her know how much she'd hurt me, but I took a breath and reminded myself to keep it under control. So, I started by asking her if she was happy in our marriage. She looked at me, kind of surprised, and nodded. Yeah, of course, why wouldn't I be? I just kept looking at her, and then I asked if she'd ever been unfaithful to me. She blinked, like she hadn't expected that question to come out of nowhere. There was this brief flicker in her eyes, this tiny pause that might have seemed innocent to anyone else. But to me, it was like a flashing sign. She quickly said no, that she'd never do something like that, and then asked why I was even bringing it up. I held her gaze and went in a bit harder. I asked if she was really sure, and that's when she started getting defensive. She started with, "I don't understand why you're asking me this," and threw in a little laugh like it was all some big joke, like I was the one being weird for asking. I could see her getting uncomfortable, probably wondering how much I knew or if I'd figured things out. I let her ramble for a bit and then I dropped it. "I know you've been seeing him." That's all I said, but it was enough. Her face went pale, and she just stared at me. For a second, it looked like she was frozen, like she didn't know what to say. Then, just as I expected, she started denying it, saying I must have misunderstood, that nothing was going on. I was ready for this. I told her straight up that I'd seen the messages, the pictures, everything. She sat there in silence for what felt like ages, and I could see her brain racing, probably trying to come up with some excuse, some way to twist things, but I just looked at her, not letting her off the hook, waiting for her to finally admit it. Eventually, she broke down and admitted to kissing some guy months ago during a night out with friends. She said it was just a stupid mistake, and that she regretted it immediately. She kept saying, I didn't want to hurt you. It meant nothing. Her story was completely different from what I'd read, but I didn't say anything. I just watched her, waiting for her to dig herself deeper. So, I asked if that was it, if there was anything else she wanted to tell me. She stuck to her story, swearing up and down that it was just that one time, that it was a stupid, meaningless kiss, nothing more. She even started tearing up, saying how she didn't want to lose me over a mistake. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. It was such a sad, pathetic laugh, but I couldn't keep it in. Here she was, sitting in front of me, acting like she just made one little slip when I'd read months worth of messages between her and this guy. I looked her straight in the eye and said, I know about everything. I've seen it all, so drop the act. That was when she finally shut up. She looked down, probably realizing that there was no way out. I could see the wheels turning in her head like she was trying to figure out her next move, but I'd seen enough. I stood up, pulled my lawyer's card out of my pocket, and handed it to her. I told her I'd filed for divorce, and if she had anything to say to me from now on, she could say it to my lawyer. That's when she went from apologetic to angry. She jumped right into gaslighting mode, trying to turn it all on me. She said I was throwing everything away over one mistake and that I was overreacting. She actually had the nerve to tell me I was making a huge deal out of nothing, that I was being dramatic. Then she started crying real loud, saying I was overthinking everything and just trying to push her away. I didn't say a word. I just watched her as she went through the whole list of excuses, one after another, and then she hit me with the lowest one yet. She said, you have no one else in the world. Why would you leave the only family you have left? She threw that line at me like she knew it had hit hard, considering she knew how much I leaned on her after my parents passed. Hearing her say that felt like a punch to the gut. I'd trusted her with everything, even told her how alone I'd felt after losing my parents. And here she was, using it as some twisted way to keep me from leaving. I think that was the moment I knew for sure that there was nothing left to save. I didn't yell or scream. I just told her that I was done, that there was no coming back from this. I grabbed a few things, threw them in a bag, and headed out the door. She was still crying, saying I was making a huge mistake, that I was throwing away a decade together. I just kept walking. I couldn't stay there another minute. I got into my car and just sat there for a minute, taking it all in. This was it. The woman I thought I'd spend my life with had lied, cheated, and then tried to use my own grief against me. It was like I was waking up from some messed up dream, finally seeing things clearly for the first time in weeks. I drove off, leaving her there to think about everything. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done with her. She'd played her games, tried to manipulate me, but I wasn't falling for it. Not anymore. Update 1. After I left that night, I took her iPad with me, figuring it was my only way of knowing what she was up to without her realizing it. I wanted to stay a step ahead, and if she thought she still had the upper hand, maybe she'd keep texting him. Turned out to be a smart move, because the things I found in those messages, they gave me all the clarity I needed. First thing I did after leaving was get in touch with his wife, the friend's wife, who had no idea what was going on. I reached out and told her everything, showed her the messages, the photos, every bit of proof I had. She was furious. She didn't believe it at first, but once she read through what I'd shown her, she broke down. She thanked me for telling her and said she needed time to process it all, but we both knew this wasn't going to be the end of it. For the next few days, I stayed pretty low-key, living out of a hotel, checking in with my lawyer, and getting everything I needed set up. Meanwhile, I kept reading the messages on the iPad, just waiting to see what they'd say next. And what I found, let's just say it made me glad I'd taken that iPad with me. In one of the conversations, she told him, well, at least I'll get a huge share of his parents' inheritance. and that they could use it to start over somewhere new. The number she mentioned was $1.5 million. Money my parents left me when they passed. She knew exactly what it meant to me, that I wanted to save it for something special, maybe for our future family someday, or for investments. But here she was, already spending it with him in her head. That comment, that specific message was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe she'd gone that far, planning a future with him, all while scheming to take my parents' money. She was already thinking of it as theirs. Just heartless. After that, I booked another meeting with my lawyer. I told him everything I'd seen and mentioned that she was targeting my inheritance. He reassured me though, thanks to some legal steps my parents had set up, she couldn't actually touch that money. Apparently they'd anticipated situations like this, and it was legally protected as long as I kept it separate from our shared finances. The relief I felt when he told me that? Huge. That inheritance was the last piece of my parents I had, and I wasn't about to let her steal it from me. Over the next week, I kept reading the iPad messages, and sure enough, things took another turn. Her lawyer must have told her she couldn't get her hands on the inheritance because all of a sudden, she and my so-called friend were scrambling, talking about Plan B. I saw her tell him that they'd have to do something else, and that maybe the best thing for now was for her to reconcile with me. She was saying things like, maybe I should try and get him back on my side, at least for now. And of course he agreed. They figured if she played nice, she could still get something out of me in the divorce, or maybe secure some other financial benefit. It made me sick watching her switch gears so fast. She went from planning a new life with him off my inheritance to planning to fake make up with me just so she could manipulate the situation to her benefit. It was like watching someone play a role, only this time I was seeing the lines before she said them. Right on cue, she started calling me, sending me these long texts about how we should talk and how she wanted to work things out. She'd bring up old memories, throw out lines about how much she loved me, and how we shouldn't let one mistake destroy everything we'd built. It was like she thought she could erase everything I'd seen just by throwing a few nice words my way, but I wasn't buying it, so I ignored her calls. Every time she messaged, I'd reply with, "Contact my lawyer." I knew she was just following through on her new plan with him, so I had no intention of giving her even a sliver of hope that I was falling for it. When she kept pushing, I blocked her completely. I didn't want to hear any more of her lies. For a couple of months, I just focused on keeping things quiet. I let the lawyers handle everything. I kept working, saving money, and getting ready to move on. I didn't hear much from her after I blocked her, but I knew she was getting updates from the lawyers. Her attempts to reconcile didn't last long. Once she realized I wasn't budging, I guess she finally accepted that I wasn't going to play her game. Finally, a few months later, the divorce was finalized. My lawyer made sure my inheritance was safe, untouched, and I got to keep everything I'd put in to protect it. The apartment situation was a mess, but in the end, I managed to sell it and move on without her. It wasn't easy. Untangling our lives after all these years took more energy than I'd expected, but it was worth it. I didn't have to worry about her anymore. I've thought a lot about what I went through, and honestly, I'm just glad it's over. She tried to take everything from me, even the memories of my parents' hard work and legacy, just to run off with some guy who pretended to be my friend. It's a twisted kind of betrayal, but I guess that's the person she really was all along. Now, I'm focusing on my future, the one that's actually mine, without any more lies. I've still got a ways to go, but at least I'm free from all her schemes. For the first time in a long time, I can start fresh, and that's enough for now.